welcome to week 9. You're more than halfway through the course at this point. You should have read chapters 26 through 29 this week. And in our reading this week, we have the second temple sermon, the temple sermon remix, so to speak. In this one, in chapter 26, the emphasis is no longer on Shiloh. It's no longer on debunking the people's false theology about their safety in the temple precinct. Now the emphasis is on Jeremiah the person and what happens to him as a person because of him delivering this sermon. And we see that they want to kill him. The section of the text narrates Jeremiah's experience. It was likely written by Baruch. And the result is they sentenced him to death, but some elders come along and they remember something that happened back in Isaiah's time, or under Hezekiah's king, when Hezekiah was king. And they remember the prophet Micah. Now you know Micah, he's a minor prophet in the Old Testament. And what had happened was he prophesied about Jerusalem being plowed like a field. That the Jerusalem would become a heap of rubble and the Temple Mount would be overgrown with thickets. And so Micah prophesied that. This was back, 100 years before. And the people responded. And therefore, because they responded and repented, Jerusalem wasn't plowed like a field. And the Temple Mount didn't become overgrown with thickets. And so there's some officials here that they're about to kill Jeremiah, put him to death, and they say, wait a minute. Remember what happened with Micah? And maybe this could be the case with this guy. If you look in chapter 26, verse 19, they're talking about the situation with Micah. Did Hezekiah, king of Judah, or anyone else in Judah put him to death? Talking about Micah. Did not Hezekiah fear the Lord and seek his favor? And did not the Lord relent, so that he did not bring the disaster he pronounced against them? We're about to bring a terrible disaster on ourselves. And so they decide not to kill Jeremiah. And then we go into another symbolic act in chapter 27. This one has to do with a yoke. So God has these Old Testament prophets do some strange things at some times. And at this particular time, God had Jeremiah walking around wearing a yoke around his neck to symbolize submission under a rule. He was basically supposed to be doing this symbolic act for his own people in Jerusalem, but also any other envoys that came in from the surrounding nations to say, we all might as well submit to the yoke of Babylon. If we don't submit, then we're going to die by famine, plague, or sword. So you might as well submit. So him wearing this yoke would have caused people to ask the question, and then he could have told them, I'm wearing this yoke because we all need to submit to the yoke of Babylon. It's inevitable. This is how we will survive. This is how we'll live if we just submit to the yoke of Babylon. Well, in the next chapter, we find this false prophet Hananiah standing up, and he has an audience, and he's preaching, and he's saying within 2 years, the yoke of Babylon is going to be thrown off of us, and God will restore us and will bring us back, bring back this place, Jehoiachin, bring back Jehoiachin and reestablish us. Well, Jeremiah is in the audience that Hananiah is preaching, and he begins to heckle Hananiah and basically says, oh, good word, great. I really hope it happens just like you're saying. But in fact, it's not going to happen that way. Well, it makes Hananiah mad, and what Hananiah does is he comes and he breaks the yoke off of Jeremiah's neck. It tells us in chapter 28, verse 10. And he says, this is the false prophet saying this. This is what the Lord says, in the same way I will break the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, off the neck of all the nations within 2 years. So he broke off that yoke off of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah kind of stews in that for a while. He goes off, but then he comes back, and then he says, Hananiah, not only is he's going to replace that yoke with an iron yoke, and you too are going to die. He tells him how he's going to die. So it's like he kind of goes away mad, and he stews in it for a while. Then he gets a word from the Lord, and he brings it back to Hananiah. And then in chapter 29, we have the letters to the exiles. You have a whole unit that talks about the letters to the exiles. what Jeremiah tells the people who had been taken, because they're sitting there waiting for God to restore them back to the land, he tells them, settle down, build houses, marry, have families. Matter of fact, seek the welfare of Babylon, which they hated Babylon. Babylon was their captors. Babylon was the reason they were in all this pain and agony. And Jeremiah is saying, pray for them and seek their welfare. He says, your own welfare is wrapped up in their welfare. If they do well, then you will too. Not the words the exiles wanted to hear, but Jeremiah reminds them, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. So that promise that we know so well is in the context of Jeremiah giving them the very difficult message to settle down in your land of captivity and seek the Lord. He will restore you. He has your future. But your future is contingent on you seeking him with all of your heart, even now. So I hope you enjoy that unit when you get to it. Have a great week.